asked to do a little presentation, special presentation on biblical archaeology artifacts, and also have a question and answer session during this part of the Sabbath School this morning. So if you weren't here this morning, I'm Randy Younker from the Institute of Archaeology here at Andrews University, and my colleague, Dr. Jeff Hudon, is going to bring in 4 or 5 artifacts, including one great big heavy one of Nabonidus. We talked about him this morning, and we'll talk about him for the second service as well, the king of Babylon, Nabonidus. But we've got a few other little things, so we're going to give you a little view. We have over 9,000 artifacts in the Horn Archaeology, no, over 8,000, nearly 9,000 artifacts that go back to Linwood and Siegfried Horn. We go on archaeological excavations, and for a long time, the government of Jordan would allow us to keep 50% of the things we found in the excavation. So that formed a large part of our collection. And then we traveled to Israel, Jordan, and other countries, and there are places you can legally buy artifacts. We're not Indiana Jones who, goes out, obtainer of rare antiquities. I always like that title. It's a pseudo title, but it sounds kind of intriguing. But if you're caught really taking artifacts without proper paperwork and so on, you get in big trouble, and they may not let you come back into the country. But we've legally acquired over 8,000 artifacts. We have a brick with Nebuchadnezzar's name on it. We'll be talking about him later on. And we have pottery from almost every period. We have a Baal. I don't know if, he's here today. An authentic idol, bronze statue that actually was worshipped by people over in the Palestine area. I would say 80% of our artifacts are original, authentic. We have replicas we've gotten from the Louvre and the British Museum of certain other key artifacts. They wouldn't give us the originals, so we had to take some very nice copies. So we have a few things. I think we're waiting for one more. This is the biggie. This morning and this for the second service, we're going to be talking about King Nabonidus, and we have, in this case, a reproduction of the Nabonidus stela. His picture is carved on it. 3 of the deities that he worshipped, the moon, the sun, and Jupiter. They represented Marduk and the god Sin, the moon god, and so forth. And so you can get an idea of what one of these looks like. I've seen a number of these in museums throughout the Middle East, as well as in Britain, the Louvre, and so forth. So this is actually a reproduction of Nabonidus who we'll be talking about. So this would date, the original dates to the 6th century, about 556 for this particular one, but this is a plaster copy. Like I said, they don't give us the original of some of these things, but this is historically very significant because, as I'll share with you later, Nabonidus had a dream that was structured almost identical to the dream that Daniel had that's recorded in Daniel chapter 8, where you've got the ram and the he-goat fighting, and then that dream's interrupted by 2 angels talking to each other about the sanctuary's restoration. Nabonidus, 3.5 years earlier, had a similar dream, and we're going to be talking about that. That dream actually helps substantiate the historicity of both Daniel and his dream and dates them properly to the 6th century, showing that Daniel's prophecy was indeed a predictive prophecy. Dr. Hudon's going to help me here. Jeff, go ahead, and we're going to talk about... I'll give you the microphone here. You got the little
Sure.
bowl.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, we'll start with this one here. It's a very, very small artifact, but sometimes the smallest artifacts have the most value as far as learning and teaching us about biblical history. One of the deep desires of most archaeologists is to find remnants of Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. And I believe some of those have been found. But in 1983, 1982, somewhere around there, what appeared on the antiquities market, in other words, it was for sale in an antiquity shop in Jerusalem, was a small, very exquisitely carved ivory pomegranate. Now, unfortunately, this pomegranate was chipped, but it was inscribed, and some of that inscription was missing. But enough survived that we are fairly certain what it said. And this is in Paleo-Hebrew, and it said, belonging to the temple of the Lord, Yahweh, the Hebrew divine name, holy to the priest. Okay? And so this, to this day, really actually remains the only likely remnant that we have of Solomon's temple. Now, I don't want to get into other possibilities. Some of the stones of Solomon's temple may be in the western wall in Jerusalem. The very badly worn stones may date back to Solomon. Even the wood, the cedar beams that he got from Hiram, king of Tyre, they just replaced the roof on the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third most holiest site in Islam, and they did carbon dating on those beams. And some of those beams go back to the New Testament, and even some earlier to the time of the first temple, or the Temple of Solomon. Hard to believe, but they reused that lumber, those beams, and so yeah, there's other things now, but if you go to the Israel Museum, at least the last time I was there, that is front and center when you walk into the museum. It's one of the prized finds of Old Testament history. So we have a replica of that, except better than that, it's actually restored. The chip is actually restored, and the whole inscription is restored. So that's very, very important for biblical history. Now, that was perforated, so that was used probably either as a scepter by a priest, or it might have been a dangle, on the hem of his robe. We don't know for sure. But to look at and see something from that great temple is very, very impressive. Now, over here, do you want me to go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We have two bronze objects, and the first one is a statue that's got his arm up, and that's actual statue of Baal, or Baal, the Canaanite god. And that was a statue that Dr. Siegfried Horn purchased in Beirut, Lebanon in 1972. It is real, everybody. You're looking at something that's 3,200 years old, from the period of the Judges. And this is the Baal that caused so much syncretistic problems with the Israelites, where they wanted to worship Yahweh, but also have a foot in the Canaanite religions as well. And believe it or not, it's never been published. I'm surprised Horn didn't publish it. But he's got his hand lifted up. Both hands are perforated, and that would have either been a lightning bolt or a spear or a club, a war club. And we see images of Baal in those stances from in other contexts, from reliefs and other statues. So that's very, very important, and it's important for biblical history as well. The statue, or the figure next to it, is a cultic bull, and that's actually a very, very fine reproduction of a bull that was found in the Samaria highlands, again dating to the period of the Judges, about 1200, 1100 BC. Now, the cultic bull is a very, very strong religious motif, both in Egypt and in Israel and other cultures as well. But I want to point out, especially in Canaanite religion, you would have Baal, the storm god, riding the bull and throwing lightning bolts in the clouds, the rider in the clouds, and causing rain to fall upon the earth. And the rain in Canaanite mythology was actual semen from Baal. And again, fertility for the earth. And so this idea was taken by the psalmist. And it was actually a polemic against Canaanite religion. But he says, Yahweh, the Lord, rides on the clouds. The Lord has dominion over all creation, over all other gods. And we didn't fully understand that until a great discovery took place in 1929 and following at an ancient Canaanite city called Ugarit in northern Syria, Ras Shamra. And they found there a huge cache, a library of Canaanite religious texts, which opened our understanding to the proper exegesis of some of the Psalms, because they were written against the Canaanite believers who were, again, throughout society, the original readership of the book of Psalms. So very, very important to understand Baal in context when you were living in the Old Testament times. Now, you remember Jeroboam, the first king of the divided kingdom, the northern kingdom? He established two shrines to counter the Jerusalem temple. One at Bethel, the main one at Bethel, and a smaller one at Dan. The shrine at Dan has been excavated, and you remember he put up cultic bulls with nobody on them. So Yahweh's an invisible God, so the Israelite could envision Yahweh riding those bulls. And that's what he tried to lure Israelites from not going to the feasts in Jerusalem, that way separating, keeping the unifying factors between the northern and southern kingdom apart. So again, these are all important for understanding biblical history in that context. the way the original readers of the biblical text would understand them.
One other interesting fact, these somewhat, particularly when they're, I think the bullets claim to have been found at an Israelite site, a cultic site, and I think they're still saying that. That would show Israelites kind of compromise on their worship of Yahweh by still worshiping or having symbols that could also be interpreted in a Canaanite sense. The interesting thing about that is we find at Israelite sites a lot of evidence of unfaithfulness, if you will, to Yahweh as their only God. They were compromising all the time. And of course, the prophets are criticizing, complaining that the Israelites are doing this actually. The interesting thing about that, archaeologists find evidence of this Israelite compromise in artifacts like this, but after the Israelites were taken away into captivity, into Babylon primarily, and after they come back, that made a profound impact on their thinking. And as my colleague Ephraim Stern from Hebrew University said, he was a major archaeologist, and I see someone who's on the dig remembers him. But he said, after the time of the return, you look at all the archaeological sites in Israel, there's not a single idol that's found. They learned their lesson. So they came back and they didn't make any more idols, which is rather remarkable. So we can see a real difference between the before exile and the after exile Israelites. I guess our final thing, I'll talk about this just briefly, and Jeff, feel free to add. Jeff, by the way, works at the Institute of Archaeology. He's a staff archaeologist there and helps me with administrative matters, and he's been on, I think, most of our archaeological dig projects as well as some of his own. So he's a very experienced archaeologist and a teacher, actually, and we've appreciated his work with us. This artifact here is actually called the Gezer calendar. The original was found at before World War I at the site of Gezer, probably about 1904 or thereabouts. And it's one of the earliest examples of writing of the ancient Israelites. It's very important. A lot of people would say things like, the critics, Moses couldn't have written the Bible because the Israelites didn't know how to write and this kind of thing. This isn't our earliest one, but it's one of the earliest ones. Goes at least to the 10th century BC, not quite back to Moses, but it's an agricultural calendar actually describing the sequence of seasons and the various crops that the Israelites would plant. And it conforms to instructions given in the Bible as well. So it's one of our earliest examples of writing. This particular one, it was discovered, as I said, before World War I. It ended up in the museum at Istanbul because before World War I, what's today called Palestine and Israel were part of the Ottoman Empire. So any interesting artifacts found in Palestine, such as the Gezer calendar, were shipped up to the museum in Istanbul, as it's known today. It used to be Constantinople. And I'm told the story that my predecessor, Dr. Siegfried Horn, the late Dr. Siegfried Horn, had gone to Istanbul to look for artifacts, including the Siloam Tunnel inscription and the Gezer calendar, because they were very famous. You don't see them in Israel. You have to go to Turkey, to Istanbul, to see them. So he asked about them because they weren't on display anywhere. And they said, well, I think those are in our storage room somewhere. And he said, well, can you take me in there and maybe we can find them? So they did. They allowed him to come in. They rooted around shelves with all these old artifacts from all over the Ottoman Empire. And sure enough, Siegfried found the Gezer calendar there. He explained to the people at the museum how important this was, and then it went on prominent display, that in the Siloam Tunnel inscription. There may have been a little bit of bias because Turkey's Islamic and this is an Israelite discovery, and sometimes there's tensions between Israel and Turkey politically, so that may be the reason some artifacts temporarily disappear, but it has been on display, so it's a very important example. And by the way, Siegfried got permission to make a copy of the original Gezer calendar in Istanbul, and he reproduced quite a few of them, so most of the ones you see in museums came from Andrews University, courtesy of Siegfried Horn, and he put a special thing in it. Whenever you use one of our copies, you have to give credit to Andrews University. So that's one way that we became sort of famous throughout the biblical archaeology world. So this one kind of tipped over, I think, when we brought him in, so he's not quite aligned right, but you can come over and see all of these on display in the Horn Museum. We're open most Sabbath afternoons, 3 to 5, almost every Sabbath. And through the course of the week, if you're there during our business hours and you come in and smile at this guy over here, he might unlock the door for you and let you see some of our treasures. And down below, we don't have the Ark of the Covenant, but we do have a big vault with nearly 8,000 artifacts of every kind imaginable from the biblical world. So come by and visit us sometime. With that, somebody else will have to help me with the time, but we wanted to have the opportunity for a few questions about archaeology in general, either these artifacts or about other things. Yes, there's a... Yeah, that was a question I got from 2 or 3 people before I came up here, because they had advertised Noah's Ark. The original thing was to do a show and tell, then I saw that they'd put in the Noah's Ark. I'll talk about that more this afternoon with pictures, but I don't have the pictures here. Starting about, 7 or so years ago, I was approached by some people that said that wood had been found on Mount Ararat, the famous one that you see in most of the pictures. It's called in Turkish Ari Dağ, the mountain of pain, and having climbed it myself a couple of times, I can affirm that's a good description of it. It's a volcano, an extinct volcano, and one of the things we're trying to do is find out, could that really be a mountain from the flood? Because since it's a volcano, it could have erupted after the flood. If it erupted after the flood, then it's not where the ark landed. We actually have a geologist working with us. He's from Iceland, PhD. He specializes in volcanoes. He happens to be an Adventist too, which is pretty cool. And so he's been working with us on taking samples from the core of this mountain to see if it indeed is a flood mountain, or is it a mountain that arose after? There are other big mountains in the area. The Bible says the ark landed on the mountains of Ararat. So we were invited to look at some wood that was found on this particular mountain, and it was a real gain getting up there. I won't go through that. Several stories embedded in one. To make a long story short, we finally got up there. We finally saw wood. We finally got some C14 dates, and it turns out the wood that's being called the ark, there's a lot of wood up there in this one canyon called Red Canyon, but it comes from, we discovered, houses that are about 200 to 500 years old. Most of them are about 200 years old along the Black Sea. We have a special research team taking samples, and we can identify the wood. We can identify the woodworking technique, actually, on the wood on Mount Ararat, and we discovered it all comes from houses built by people from Georgia and southeast Turkey. They built these things, and we found out that one of the Kurdish guys who takes people up to see Noah's Ark actually bought a couple of these houses, disassembled them, and had the wood taken up and put in the snow and ice. And for $1,000 or $5,000 or $70,000, depending on how rich he thinks you are, he'll take you up there to see this wood. And so we've discovered that's a pretty slick fraud, and we're in the process of publishing a scientific report on that wood. Meanwhile, we are systematic. I have to be careful what I say because it's a politically sensitive and delicate thing, but we have been surveying that mountain. We're doing a lot of drone imaging and so forth. We have gone to 4 other sites where ark hunters of the past 50 or 70 years have said they found the ark. By the way, as I'm telling you these stories, I believe in the ark and I believe in the flood, so it's not a question of that. We are sympathetic researchers. However, we went to, I think, at least 4 other sites where people had published a fuzzy picture from a mile away of something that's kind of square and gray, and it's embedded in the ice. And so we've been able to locate those thanks to new technology and do high-resolution imaging of them. And they turn out, in each case, to be rock formations. So none of those particular claims have turned out to be. We haven't published this yet. We're getting the data together, and in the near future, at the appropriate time, we'll be publishing that as well. So our research on that particular mountain continues. We've been involved with some survey teams in the area as well. That's another story. We've also been going to other ark mountains. One of the more famous ones, maybe number 2 on the list, is called Mount Judy, and it's on the border between Syria and southeast Turkey. We've been there at least a couple of times. There are a number of archaeological sites on the mountain, all associated with Noah's Ark, churches, mosques, and so forth to commemorate Noah's Ark. And there's even a claim that Noah's Ark itself was there. It seems like what was Noah's Ark was actually a stone structure built to look like Noah's Ark by monks after the 4th century. We haven't been able to get good dates on that yet. We're still working with local officials. We're in connection with local universities and Islamic, Turkish scholars. So we have a team, and we're all kind of working together to track this down. But I don't think probably Noah's Ark was on that, and really it's not in the mountains of Ararat. But we're still studying it. Some of my Turkish friends still have high hopes that it's Noah's Ark mountain. We also, scholars have said there's a mountain in the middle of Arabia that Muhammad the prophet actually thought was Mount Judy, the mountain of the ark. So just about in January, this past January, we had a team of about 8 or 10 of us. We've traveled to Saudi Arabia. First time I'd ever been there. Our ladies were a little bit nervous because of the very strict codes for women, dress and head scarves and all of that. But they've been opening up to the outside world, and we had a wonderful time. Every Saudi Arabian we met was gracious, male and female. Our women researchers had no problems at all. We had a wonderful research trip there. We went to the local Mount Ararat and did some research there. Maybe I'll talk about that this afternoon because I have the pictures and so forth. We didn't find Noah's Ark, but we can see why they thought the Ark was there, and we'll share the evidence for that. That was probably the original Mount Judy, and it was transferred later up to the Syrian-Turkish border, and we're doing research on that. Then there's another Ark mountain. It's the one that's mentioned in Gilgamesh, and it's in northern Iraq. It's called Mount Nasir in the Gilgamesh epic, and we're trying to get in there. We have pictures, but we want to explore the mountain climate. There are some Assyrian archaeological remains on the mountain, but we want to get up there. That's apparently where the Assyrians thought the ark was located, going back to the time of Gilgamesh, perhaps all the way to before the time of Abraham even. I don't think the ark is there either, but to be systematic, we hope to get up there and explore that mountain too. And we have a couple other mountains. So what we're doing is systematically studying these mountains. And I'll close this by saying the story of Noah and the ark is super strong in that part of the world. In eastern Turkey, in Armenia, in Azerbaijan. We were very happy when we heard Trump at the beginning of his thing announce the peace treaty between Azerbaijan and Armenia. I'm not getting into local politics, but for us this is very good because now we can move in both those countries. It was a situation you couldn't go in both because they were at war, but now we can go. We've been to Armenia. We've also been up to Georgia. The earliest evidence archaeologically for the production of wine comes from there. It's not far from Mount Ararat, and we had the famous Noah story about how he's the first guy to get into the wine business, and that tradition's very strong. And so as we travel around, we find churches, we find mosques, we find settlements, we find tombs of Noah, at least 5, that are scattered throughout this whole area. And we're systematically studying each of these archaeologically and historically, trying to put the emergence of this story and how it was manifested in the local material cultures in a systematic way, so that people interested in the story of the ark can see this in one place and get a full understanding of each of these sites in one reading. So that's kind of it's an ambitious goal. We're having a lot of fun doing it, and of course we're hoping things settle down. We would like to go to Iran too, actually, but right now they don't seem to like Americans much. So getting permission to go there is kind of off limits. But as these places open up, we'll continue our exploration. I'm sure there's probably lots of questions, but that's an overview of what we've been doing for about the last 7 years. We do about 2 or 3 trips a year to that part of the world, investigating these various structures, tombs, mosques, churches, and all the different ways that the story of the ark is illustrated in the local culture. It's pretty amazing, pretty exciting. We found a lot of friends over there, and we're going to have a big meeting at the university closest to Mount Ararat. It's called Ari University, and they've asked us, Andrews University, to work with them second year to have a special symposium. And all of this research, they're bringing together all their Turkish scholars, other scholars from other countries. Andrews University will be there to discuss all of the research dealing with Noah's Ark in a scientific way. So that's kind of what's going on. So big answer for your question, but you got the full, you put in a nickel, you get a quarter. So any other questions on archaeology? Is it time to go? Or is that a question? Oh, okay. Please, there's a roving mic, so somebody will have to tell me when I'm supposed to quit. It's 10:55, so I don't know what the schedule is for Village these days. Somebody have a hand? There's a hand there. Go ahead. Your mic is coming. And Jeff, feel free to take the mic from me and jump in. So,
To answer your question, we can go till 11:10.
Okay, good. So we have about 14 minutes. Good.
Given your decades-long experience in archaeology, what would be your top 3 archaeological finds that confirm the veracity of the Bible?
That's a great question. I'll be talking about that this afternoon, actually. I'm going to share the top 5 finds that we've been involved with. Probably for me personally, one of the most exciting archaeological expeditions we had was in 1990 when Andrews University joined up with the University of Arizona, and we excavated the town of Gezer, the biblical town. A lot of connections in the Bible with Gezer. Joshua conquered it. It appears in later stories. An earthquake destroyed part of it. And Solomon is said to have built a palace there, a governor's mansion, after he took over from the Canaanites, the city of Gezer. While we were digging there, we found evidence of both Joshua's conquest. That was very exciting. I'll tell you more of the story tonight. And we also found evidence of Solomon's presence at Gezer, just like the Bible says. Very dramatic evidence, chronologically locks right into what the Bible says, 1 Kings 9. So that was a lot of fun for us. It was a very dramatic dig that summer. Certainly the Noah's Ark site, climbing Mount Ararat for the first time. While we didn't find the Ark, that whole experience of being over there, climbing up the mountain, taking several days, base camp, high camp, freezing cold, using horses, probably descendants from the ancient people of Ararat. The Assyrians used to like to buy or steal their horses because they were best horses in the Middle East. But we traveled up there and had quite an exploration. So that's certainly something, but didn't confirm the Bible. Right now, in Sicily, we're digging a Paleo-Christian church. It's probably the oldest church in Sicily, discovered archaeologically after Constantine approved Christianity. That's been very exciting. We have a lot of evidence. We found coins from the time of Constantine. We found a burial there. We've discovered, and this is going to rattle some people, but there was 2 burials in the church, a priest and a woman. The woman, her skeleton had a gold crown on it, a diadem. She had a gold necklace. She had gold earrings. So much for the jewelry thing. But anyway, she had gold bracelets. She was just covered with gold. She clearly was very wealthy. And our preliminary research suggests that she was either the wife of the priest or she may have been a benefactor for the church. She was extremely wealthy. She clearly was a leader in this Christian church. And the interesting thing was around her neck was a medallion in silver and gold of the Emperor Gratian, who was a young emperor. He died by the time he was 23 years old. The only thing he really contributed to as emperor was he proclaimed the doctrine of the Trinity. God is God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. And he gave these medallions out to people in his kingdom, his empire that supported him. This woman had one of those, which is rather remarkable. And the interesting thing about that is our city is on the border between the Trinitarian Christians and the Arian Christians who did not believe that Jesus was the Son of God. And there was a war going on between them. And this woman apparently was courageous enough and bold enough to defend the Trinitarian doctrine that she had this medallion. She was buried in the church. The church was ultimately destroyed, probably by the Arians, but it was reestablished a few years later. So that was very interesting insight on the New Testament church. And I'm trying to think, there's so many. Right now, Jeff has been involved in this. Andrews University is over in the field right now in Jordan, and we're digging up one of the earliest Israelite settlement sites after they leave Egypt and they come to the Promised Land. Before they go across the Jordan River and Jericho collapses, they capture Heshbon, and shortly thereafter, the Israelites start settling around 1300 BC, a few years after the Exodus, and we're digging up one of those Israelite settlements, which is it's very politically sensitive. When some Jordanians who are very strong Islamic people, I have to be careful, I may not be able to post this online, but we had to go over because they said, do you have any proof the Israelites were at your site? Because somebody had posted a video online saying that we actually think it's true, but they said, if you want to continue to work here, you have to quit saying that. So we had to promise them we won't say that. They said, if you find an artifact, fine, but you can't say anything. That's how sensitive it is right now. They almost took our permit away, but we're quite sure the Israelites were there. It does reflect what we read in Joshua, the book of Joshua, and Judges. And at nearby sites, we didn't bring this up, but we've actually found Israelite inscriptions, Hebrew inscriptions, and an Israelite sanctuary in Jordan. So there's a lot of evidence that the biblical story of the conquest and the settlement patterns that the Bible describes are accurate. So we're digging that up too. So we got Noah's Ark, we've got Israelite settlement after the Exodus, and we've got King Solomon, and we've got early Christianity, all part of our Andrews University projects. And I'll go into all of those this afternoon in a lot more detail. And I think I'm supposed to quit now. No, I still have 8 minutes, sorry. I can't even see that clock. That's what happens when you get to be my, look at that clock. I don't see anything back there, but they got these nice, bright, big numbers up in front, so that helps me keep track. Yes, please.
Would you be able to clarify Belshazzar's relationship to King Nebuchadnezzar? Since today I learned about King Nabonidus, Nabonidus, if I'm saying that right.
Did you want to say Nabonidus or Nebuchadnezzar?
His relationship to Nebuchadnezzar, just because in Daniel it mentions Nebuchadnezzar being his father.
Yeah.
So what does that actually mean? Since Nabonidus wasn't related to Nebuchadnezzar.
Right. In ancient Near Eastern world, including in Hebrew, so those languages, but also in those cultures, the expression "father of" can have two meanings, and this is very well established. It can mean a biological, I'll say three meanings. It can be your biological father. And in the genealogies of the Bible, I think it's intended to be a biological father-son relationship when a certain word formula appears. Other times it can refer to your grandfather, your great-grandfather, or an ancestor that may go back many generations. They will also call him your father. It can also refer to someone that's just, you respect them, and you're maybe carrying on in the same office, but there's no biological relationship at all, but you may refer to them as your father, as sort of a mentor or a person you're following after, admiring. So it can have all three of those meanings. So when it says that Belshazzar was related to, or the son of, or Nebuchadnezzar was his father, it's probably one of those latter meanings, that there is kind of a connection, but not a biological one. At the same time, scholars are arguing, like Nabonidus himself. I don't get into that in my sermon because it's too complicated. Some people suggest that Belshazzar's father, Nabonidus, had married a daughter of Nebuchadnezzar. We're not sure of that, but if so, then there would be sort of a contorted relationship. That relationship wouldn't have made Nabonidus eligible to be the king, because a daughter's not good enough. Sorry, you got to be the son of a king. And that's the point I made this morning, and I'll make again in our sermon a little bit. So anyway, there's a lot of ambiguity about what it means to have someone as your father. It can mean a whole bunch of things. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. Are there any others before we close down? Wonderful. It's one of the first times I've answered all the questions and we can quit. We'll have more time this afternoon. I'm sure our presentation, both at the church service and this afternoon, when we'll go into more detail on some of our discoveries with slide illustrated, will probably stimulate some more response. So God bless. I guess if that's it, we'll go ahead and close down and get ready for the church service.